In the electric chair, he asked to see his dog one last time and shocked everyone. No one understood why that request changed the atmosphere so much. But when the dog entered, something unexpected fell on the prison floor. And it was at that moment that the secret buried for years began to emerge. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The sun hadn't yet risen when Mike woke up that March morning. His bare feet touched the cold floor of the small cabin where he had lived for more than 10 years, at the back of Clearwater Farm. The air carried the sweet smell of damp earth and the perfume of orange blossoms that grew wild around his simple home. It had been like this every day for a decade, the same routine, the same comforting silence, the same peace that only the countryside knows how to offer. He put on his cotton shirt already faded by the sun and time, slipped on his worn boots that knew every stone of that place, and opened the creaking door. Immediately, a golden shadow leaped toward him, wagging its tail with an energy that seemed capable of illuminating the entire dawn. It was Thunder, his inseparable companion for 8 years, since he had appeared as a puppy, skinny and scared, seeking shelter under the porch. "Good morning, old friend," murmured Mike, stroking the dog's head with the tenderness of someone who found in animal loyalty what the world of men rarely offered. Thunder always responded the same way, with affectionate licks and bright eyes that seemed to understand every word, every feeling. The routine invariably began at the same time. Mike walked through the extensive cornfields of the property, checking the plantations, observing the growth of the ears, mentally noting what needed special care. Thunder ran alongside him, stopping here and there to sniff some interesting footprint or chase butterflies dancing among the green leaves. These were moments of pure harmony, where time seemed not to exist and life boiled down to that genuine simplicity. Clearwater Farm had belonged to the Mitchell family for 3 generations. Mr. Arthur, a man in his 60s, had inherited the property from his father and maintained it with the same care and dedication. His wife, Mrs. Helen, took care of the main house with discreet elegance, while their daughter Isabella, just 9 years old, brought life and joy to every corner of that place. The girl had always disheveled brown hair from playing and curious eyes that saw magic in everything around her. Mike remembered perfectly the day Isabella met him. She was only 5 years old and had escaped from the nanny's care to explore the fields. She found him fixing a broken fence and, without any shyness, approached to observe his work. Since then, she became a constant presence in his routine. "Mr. Mike, Mr. Mike!" The girl's high-pitched voice echoed through the cornfields every morning, announcing her arrival with the punctuality of a clock. She ran toward him with open arms, always followed by Thunder, who seemed to have also adopted the role of guardian of the little one. "Good morning, Miss Isabella," Mike replied with the discreet smile he reserved only for her. "Did you come to help old Mike today?" "I did, and I brought cookies that Miss Clara made," she would say, taking from her small basket a carefully prepared package. "She said it's for you and for Thunder, too." Miss Clara was the farm's cook, a kind lady who had taken a liking to Mike since his arrival. She always sent some special food through Isabella, who insisted on being the official messenger of these kindnesses. The mornings went by like this, in a gentle dance of work and companionship. Mike taught the girl about plants, showed her how to identify when the corn was just right, explained about the phases of the moon and their influence on agriculture. Isabella absorbed every word with genuine interest, asking questions that often surprised him with their depth. "Why do plants always grow upward, Mr. Mike?" she asked one sunny morning while observing the seedlings they had planted together. "Because they know light comes from above, little one. They seek what they need to live," he answered, without imagining how those simple words would remain engraved in the child's memory forever. Thunder actively participated in these conversations, lying down next to Isabella like a silent protector. The dog had developed a special instinct with the girl, never letting her stray too far, always alert to any strange movement around. It was as if he understood that his mission included caring not only for Mike, but also for the little one who had conquered his owner's heart. The afternoons were dedicated to the games Isabella invented. Hide and seek among the cornstalks, races with Thunder, building little houses with branches and dry leaves. Mike participated when he could, but most of the time he just watched, feeling an inexplicable tenderness seeing that purity in motion. "One day I'll have a farm just like this," Isabella declared one September afternoon, sitting on Mike's cabin porch while he fixed a tool. "And I'll hire you to take care of my crops. Is that so?" Mike laughed, without stopping his work. "And I'll already be very old to work, little one." "It doesn't matter. You can sit in the rocking chair telling stories, and Thunder can stay beside you keeping you company." These conversations were etched in Mike's heart like precious photographs. He had never known fatherhood, never experienced the unconditional love of a family. But in those afternoons with Isabella, he felt a taste of what his life could have been if fate had been different. The nights were the most sacred time for Mike. After the simple dinner he prepared for himself, he would sit on the porch with Thunder by his side, contemplating the starry sky that stretched infinitely over the fields. It was a time for reflection, for silent gratitude, for that life which, although humble, brought him a peace he knew was rare in the world. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Helen genuinely respected him. They never treated him like a common employee, but as someone who was part of the family, albeit in a discreet way. They paid him a fair salary, offered medical assistance when necessary, and most importantly, allowed Isabella to spend time with him, recognizing the good that friendship did for the girl. "Mike is a gift that God sent to our family," Mrs. Helen would say to her friends when they came to visit. "Isabella has learned values from him that no school could teach." It was true. Living with Mike had taught the girl about simplicity, about respect for nature, about the importance of honest work. She had learned to value the little things, to find beauty in details that go unnoticed to hurried eyes. Sundays were special at Clearwater Farm. The family went to church in town, and Mike took advantage to take care of heavier tasks, always accompanied by Thunder. That's when he walked to the most distant corners of the property, checking fences, observing the cattle, keeping everything in order. These solitary moments gave him the opportunity to think, to plan, to dream of small projects that would make the farm even more beautiful. It was on one of these Sundays that Mike decided to plant a special garden behind his cabin. He chose Isabella's favorite flowers, sunflowers, daisies, and wild roses, and prepared a heart-shaped flower bed. It would be a surprise for the girl's birthday, which was approaching. Thunder watched him work, lying in the shade of a tree with his eyes attentive to every movement. Sometimes he would get up to sniff the seedlings, as if wanting to give his approval to the project. There was a silent communication between them, built over years of coexistence, that dispensed with words. "What do you think, Thunder?" Mike would ask, knowing he wouldn't get a verbal response but trusting the animal's instinctive wisdom. "Will she like it?" The dog would wag his tail, and Mike interpreted this as total approval. The weeks passed in a smooth and predictable cadence. Work on the farm followed its natural rhythm, accompanying the cycles of nature. Mike woke before the sun, took care of the plantations during the day, received Isabella's visit every morning, and ended the day contemplating the stars. It was a simple life, but full of meaning. There was something magical about that routine, the feeling of belonging somewhere, of being important to someone, of making a difference, even if modest. Mike knew he had found his place in the world, and that place was shaped like a farm, smelled of wet earth, sounded like childish laughter, and had the warmth of canine loyalty. The morning of October 15th began differently. Mike woke up with a strange sensation in his chest, a premonition he couldn't explain. Thunder also seemed restless, walking back and forth inside the cabin, panting and with his ears up, as if capturing something that human senses couldn't reach. "What is it, boy?" Mike asked, stroking the dog's head. "Are you sensing something?" Thunder looked at him with those expressive eyes, then ran to the door and back, repeating the movement several times. It was his way of saying something wasn't right out there. Mike quickly got dressed and went out to check. The field seemed normal, the corn swaying gently in the morning breeze, birds singing in the trees, the sun rising on the horizon with its usual golden light. But there was something in the air, an invisible tension that made his heart race. He walked through the property as he always did, but this time Thunder wasn't running by his side with his usual joy. The dog stayed close, alert, frequently stopping to smell the air and look toward the main house. Mike followed his instinct and decided to check if everything was all right with the Mitchell family. He approached the main house discreetly, as he always did when he needed to speak with Mr. Arthur. The property was quieter than usual for that hour. Typically at this time, you could already hear the movement in the kitchen, the housekeeper's footsteps, the family's voices preparing for another day. But at that moment, only silence reigned. That's when he heard the screams. "Isabella! Isabella! Mrs. Helen's desperate voice echoed through the morning like a shot. My God, where is my daughter? Mike ran toward the house, his heart beating erratically. He found Mr. Arthur leaving the house hurriedly, still wearing his robe, with a face pale with terror. Mrs. Helen was on the porch, in tears, being supported by the housekeeper. What happened? Mike asked, still out of breath from running. Isabella has disappeared, Mr. Arthur answered with a trembling voice. She's not in her room, she's nowhere in the house, the bed wasn't even slept in. The news hit Mike like lightning. Isabella, his little friend, the light of those fields, had disappeared. Thunder began to bark incessantly, running in circles as if he also understood the gravity of the situation. When did you notice? Mike asked, trying to keep calm in order to help. Just now, Mrs. Helen answered between sobs. I went to wake her up for breakfast like I always do, and the bed was empty. The clothes she wore yesterday are on the floor, but we couldn't find the pajamas or the little shoes she always wears to sleep. Mr. Arthur had already called the police, who promised to send a team immediately. While they waited, the entire farm was mobilized to look for the girl. The workers arrived earlier, neighbors were notified, and a desperate search began. Mike knew every inch of that property better than anyone else. Along with Thunder, he began a systematic sweep of all the places where Isabella could be. The tool shed, the barn, the water pump house, the corrals, the cornfields where she loved to play. Nothing. Not a sign, not a footprint, not a clue of where she might have gone. Thunder sniffed the ground intensely, following clues invisible to human eyes. At a certain point, he stopped at the edge of a stream that crossed the property, barking loudly and scratching the earth. Mike carefully examined the spot, but found nothing that indicated the girl's presence. The hours passed slowly, laden with anguish. The police arrived at noon, bringing tracking dogs and search equipment. Sheriff Carson, an experienced 50-year-old man, personally took on the case. He asked detailed questions about Isabella's routine, about possible enemies of the family, about recent employees on the farm. Did the girl have any favorite place where she liked to be alone? The sheriff asked Mr. Arthur. She spent a lot of time with Mike, Mr. Arthur answered, pointing in the direction where Mike was helping with the search. They were very close. Isabella loved the fields, she always played around there. The sheriff approached Mike with a notepad in hand. He asked routine questions, how long he had worked on the farm, what his relationship with the girl was, if he had noticed anything strange in recent days. Mike answered everything sincerely, feeling a twinge of discomfort with the increasingly investigative tone of the questions. Were you the last person to see the girl yesterday? Asked the sheriff. Yes, she came to visit me in the morning, as she always did. She stayed until noon, then went back to the house for lunch, Mike replied, not imagining that these words would become important later. And what did you do after that? I continued working in the fields until late afternoon. Then I had dinner at home and went to bed early, as I always do. The sheriff noted everything carefully, but Mike noticed there was something different in the way he looked at him. It was no longer the friendly conversation of someone seeking information, but the interrogation of a potential suspect. The search continued throughout the afternoon and night. Neighbors joined the effort, forming groups that scoured adjacent properties, back roads, nearby woods. Helicopters flew over the region, their sirens echoing through the fields in a sound that seemed like nature's own lament. Mike didn't stop for even a minute. With Thunder by his side, he traveled every trail, every hidden corner, every possibility his mind could imagine. The dog showed himself increasingly agitated, as if he knew something terrible had happened to his little friend. In the early hours of the second day, when hope was already beginning to give way to despair, one of the police officers made a discovery that would change everything. In Mike's cabin, hidden behind an old dresser, they found a small dress, pink with yellow flowers, Isabella's favorite dress. It was dirty with soil and had dark stains that appeared to be blood. Mike Smith, you're under arrest, said Sheriff Carson, handcuffs in hand and voice cold as ice. The world collapsed on Mike at that moment. The dress there, in his house, was impossible to explain. He had never seen that piece of clothing before, had no idea how it had ended up there. But the evidence spoke louder than his words, and his protestations of innocence sounded hollow in the face of the physical reality of that discovery. I didn't do anything to the girl, Mike shouted as he was taken away, but his voice was lost in the tumult of angry voices that were beginning to form around the scene. She was like a daughter to me. I would never hurt Isabella. Thunder ran desperately after the police car, barking loudly, as if trying to explain that there was a mistake, that his owner was incapable of harming anyone, especially that girl whom they both loved so much. But the barks were also lost in the cold morning, mixed with the noise of the motor moving away. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Helen watched the arrest in complete shock. The man they trusted, whom they had allowed to get close to their daughter, was being taken away as the main suspect in Isabella's disappearance. The pain of loss now mixed with the feeling of betrayal, with the guilt of having been so naive. "How could we have been so blind?" Mrs. Helen cried in her husband's arms. "He was always with her, always. My God, what have we done?" The news spread through the region like wildfire. Mike Smith, the quiet man who worked at Clearwater Farm, had kidnapped and possibly murdered little Isabella Mitchell. The details were distorted with each conversation, with each phone call, until the version that reached people's ears was much worse than the already terrible reality. At the police station, Mike was subjected to endless interrogations. They asked about his background, about his life before the farm, about his relationships. They discovered that he had no known family, that he had arrived in the region 10 years earlier without many explanations about his past, that he lived alone and spoke little. To the investigative mind, this built the perfect profile of a dangerous man. "Where is the girl's body?" the sheriff asked for the 100th time. "I don't know. I didn't do anything to her," Mike repeated, exhausted, confused, not understanding how his life had turned into a nightmare in a matter of hours. "The dress was in your house. How do you explain that?" "I don't know how it got there. Someone must have put it there. I've never seen that dress before." But his words sounded like the flimsy excuses of a guilty person trying to escape justice. With each hour that passed without Isabella being found, the certainty of Mike's guilt was consolidated in everyone's mind. Meanwhile, at Clearwater Farm, Thunder wandered through the fields like a lost soul. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink water, just walked through the places where he used to play with Isabella and Mike, sniffing the ground, looking for clues that only he could perceive. The workers tried to take care of him, but the dog rejected any affection, any attempt at approach. It was as if he understood that his family had been torn apart, that the joy of those fields had disappeared, along with the girl and his owner. He slept on the porch of Mike's empty cabin, woke up barking during the night, and spent his days running from one side to the other, as if looking for something that everyone else had given up finding. The investigation continued, but now with the focus totally directed at Mike. They no longer looked for Isabella alive, but for her body. They didn't investigate other suspects, but only tried to extract a confession from the man they considered guilty. The case was practically closed in everyone's head. All that was missing was finding the child's remains to close the inquiry. The following months turned into an endless nightmare for Mike. The trial was a farce disguised as justice, where the community's thirst for revenge overshadowed any attempt to search for the truth. The state-appointed lawyer, a young and inexperienced man, could barely present an adequate defense in the face of public pressure and the apparent solidity of the evidence. The prosecution built a case based on circumstances. Mike was a solitary man without family, with an obscure past. He had unrestricted access to the girl, knew all her habits, and the dress had been found in his house. For the popular jury, composed of people from the region who knew and loved the Mitchell family, this was more than enough for a conviction. The defendant took advantage of the trust of an honest family. The prosecutor spoke before the jury, pointing to Mike as if he were a monster. He used his position as a trusted employee to access the victim, coldly planned this heinous act, and now cynically denies his guilt, prolonging the suffering of parents who have already lost everything. Mike listened to everything in silence, with his hands cuffed and his heart broken, not because of the accusations he knew of his innocence, but because of the pain of seeing how the people he trusted now looked at him with hatred and disgust. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Helen were in the front row, and the look of disappointment and anger on their faces was more painful than any physical punishment. His lawyer tried to argue about the lack of a body, about the absence of concrete evidence, about the possibility of Mike having been framed by third parties, but his words were drowned out by the revolted murmurs of the audience and by the unshakable certainty of the jury that they had the culprit before them. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," said the lawyer in his final defense, "we cannot condemn a man based only on circumstances. Where is the direct evidence? Where are the witnesses? Where is the body of the alleged victim? Justice cannot be done based on feeling, however understandable it may be. But it was too late. The decision had already been made in the heart of each person in that room, long before the trial began. Mike Smith was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering a minor and sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. The judge, a severe man who wanted to set an example, showed no hesitation in pronouncing the sentence, considering the gravity of the act and the coldness with which it was executed, said the judge, looking directly at Mike. This court sentences the defendant, Mike Smith, to the death penalty, to be fulfilled within 6 months from this date. The gavel hit the table with a sound that echoed through the room like a shot. Mike felt his legs weaken, but not because of the proximity of the execution, but because of the certainty that he would die carrying a guilt that was never his. The worst of all was knowing that Isabella was still missing, that her real fate remained a mystery, and that the real culprit was free while he would pay with his life for an act he had never committed. He was transferred to death row in a state prison 200 miles from the farm. His cell was small, cold, with a tiny window that let in only a thread of light during the day. There he counted the days he had left, using marks made on the wall with a small stone he had managed to hide. Each mark was a silent tear, a mute prayer, a piece of hope that died slowly. During this period, only one person showed any compassion for his situation. Father Anthony, prison chaplain, a 60-year-old man who had dedicated his life to caring for those forgotten by society, visited Mike regularly. Unlike everyone else, the priest looked him in the eyes without judgment, listened to his words without prior disbelief. "I believe in your innocence, my son," said the priest during one of these visits, holding Mike's hands through the bars. "There's something in this case that doesn't fit, something that everyone preferred to ignore in the rush to find a culprit." "It doesn't matter anymore, Father," Mike replied with a tired voice. "No one will listen to me now. In 2 weeks I'll be dead, and maybe that's better. I can't live carrying this pain anymore." "Don't say that. Where there's life, there's hope, and there's something else. I've known many guilty people over the years, seen remorse in their eyes, heard confessions drawn out by the weight of conscience. In you, I see none of that. I see only the pain of a wronged man." The priest began his own discreet investigation. He talked to people in the region, reviewed the case files, asked questions that no one had asked during the trial. He discovered inconsistencies in the investigation, gaps in the forensic analysis, and most importantly, a suspicious rush to close the case. Meanwhile, at Clearwater Farm, life had completely lost its color. Mr. Arthur had aged 10 years in a few months, walking through the property like a ghost. Mrs. Helen spent her days locked in Isabella's room, crying silently and blaming herself for having allowed her daughter to get so close to Mike. The farm, once prosperous and cheerful, was quickly withering. Several workers quit, unable to work in a place marked by so much tragedy. The plantations were being abandoned, the cattle was sold, and the property that had once been the pride of the Mitchell family was turning into a melancholy shadow of its past. Thunder continued to wander through the fields, thinner and sadder each day. He refused any care, any affection. Joe, the oldest farm worker after Mike, tried to feed him, but the dog would just smell the food and walk away, as if he had completely lost interest in life. "That animal is dying of sadness," Joe commented to his wife. "He misses Mike and little Isabella. It's as if he understands that something very wrong happened." But Joe noticed something that others didn't. Thunder hadn't stopped searching. Every day he walked a specific route, always the same, sniffing the ground with intensity. He started at Mike's cabin, passed through the cornfields, went to the boundary with the neighboring property, and always stopped at the same point, a place where the fence had been recently repaired. There the dog would spend hours sniffing, digging, barking low, as if trying to communicate with someone. Joe began to observe him with growing attention, realizing that the animal's behavior had a pattern, a logic that escaped human understanding. Could he know something? Joe murmured to himself one afternoon, watching Thunder repeat the same ritual once more. In prison, Mike received the news that his execution had been scheduled for April 15th, exactly 6 months after his conviction. 30 days before the fatal date, he was allowed to make a last request, as the institution's regulations mandated. Prisoners usually asked for a special last meal, a visit from a distant relative, or the presence of a religious leader. Mike surprised everyone with his simple and unusual request. "I want to see my dog one last time," he told the prison director. "Your dog?" "Yes." Thunder, he must still be at the farm. He was my companion for 8 years. It's the only request I make. The director was intrigued by the request, but the rules allowed this concession. He contacted Clearwater Farm, explained the situation, and asked if it would be possible to bring the animal for a farewell visit. Mr. Arthur initially refused, outraged at the idea of doing any favor for the man he believed had destroyed his family. But Mrs. Helen, touched by unexpected pity, convinced him to accept. "Let him see the dog, Arthur," she said with a tired voice. "What difference does it make now? In a few days he'll be dead anyway." Joe was put in charge of bringing Thunder to the prison. During the 3-hour trip, he observed the strange behavior of the animal. The dog seemed agitated, but not from anxiety. It was a different agitation, as if he knew something important was about to happen. On the day set for the last encounter, Mike was taken to a special room where prisoners could receive intimate visits. When the door opened and Thunder came running in, the emotion was overwhelming. The dog jumped on him with such force that he almost knocked him down, licking his face, crying in a way that only animals know how to cry, with the whole body, with the whole soul. "My old friend," cried Mike, hugging Thunder as if he were the most precious thing in the world. "I'm sorry for abandoning you. I'm sorry for not being able to protect our little girl." Tears ran down Mike's face as he stroked the golden fur he knew so well. Thunder seemed to understand that this was a special moment, a moment of farewell, and stayed quiet, just leaning against his owner's body, offering the silent comfort that only animal loyalty can provide. But then something unexpected happened. Thunder moved away from Mike, ran to a corner of the room and began to make strange movements with his head, as if he were trying to regurgitate something. Suddenly, he spat 2 small objects on the floor that he made a point of pushing toward Mike with his muzzle. Mike bent down to examine the objects and his heart almost stopped. It was a child's tooth, small and still with a root, and a dried fruit that he recognized immediately. It was a rare fruit that only grew on a specific tree on the property neighboring Clearwater Farm. "My God," Mike murmured, picking up the objects with trembling hands. "Thunder, where did you find this, boy?" The objects Thunder brought changed everything in a matter of minutes. The guard responsible for the visit immediately called the prison director, who in turn alerted the appropriate authorities. That tooth and that fruit were new evidence, potentially capable of reopening a case that everyone considered closed. Father Anthony was urgently called to the prison. When he saw the objects, his eyes filled with tears of relief mixed with outrage. For months he had silently fought for Mike's innocence, facing disbelief and criticism for defending a confessed murderer. Now, he had in his hands proof that his faith was right. "We need to act quickly," said the priest to the director. "The execution is scheduled for tomorrow. We don't have time to lose." Sheriff Carson was called in on an emergency, reluctant to reopen a case he considered definitively resolved. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. The fruit belonged to a species that only existed on Sebastian Morris's property, Clearwater Farm's neighbor. The tooth could be subjected to DNA tests to confirm if it belonged to Isabella. "How did this dog get these objects?" asked the sheriff, more to himself than to the others. "He must have been at the location where Isabella was kept," Father Anthony answered. "Animals have instincts that we've lost. Thunder never stopped looking for the girl, while we stopped at the first suspect we found." The execution was suspended on an emergency basis, and a new investigation began. This time, Thunder was included as part of the search team. The dog was taken back to Clearwater Farm, where he immediately resumed his search routine, but now accompanied by investigators. Joe, who had observed Thunder's behavior for months, served as a guide for the team. "He always comes here," he said, pointing to the spot on the boundary between the properties where the dog insisted on digging. "He stays here for hours, sniffing, digging, as if he knew there's something buried." They found a disguised entrance, covered by branches and dry leaves, that led to an underground bunker built decades ago, probably during the war as an air raid shelter. Inside, in deplorable conditions, they found Isabella. The girl was alive but extremely debilitated. She had lost a lot of weight, was dehydrated, and in a state of deep shock. When she saw Thunder entering the bunker, her eyes filled with tears, and she managed to whisper his name. It was the first word she had spoken in months. "Thunder," she murmured with a weak voice, extending her small hand to touch the moist muzzle of the dog that had never given up looking for her. The rescue was immediate. Isabella was taken to the hospital, where a medical team worked tirelessly to restore her physical and mental health. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Helen arrived running, unable to believe that the nightmare had come to an end, that their daughter was alive, that the miracle they had prayed for so much had finally happened. The investigation that followed revealed a much more complex and sordid plot than anyone could imagine. Sebastian Morris, the owner of the neighboring farm, had orchestrated the entire kidnapping as part of a plan to destroy the Mitchell family and acquire their lands at a bargain price. Morris had been in debt for years and knew that Clearwater Farm was coveted by large agribusiness companies. His plan was simple in its cruelty. Kidnap Isabella, frame someone from the neighboring property, emotionally destroy the Mitchells, and then appear as a savior, offering to buy the farm to help the family get rid of painful memories. To execute the plan, he counted on the help of two accomplices, a corrupt employee of the local police and his own older daughter, who had been romantically rejected by a cousin of Mr. Arthur years before and harbored a deep resentment toward the family. In the early morning of October 15th, while Isabella slept, they kidnapped her through her bedroom window. They took her to the bunker on Morris's property, where they kept her during all those months, feeding her just enough to keep her alive. The dress found in Mike's cabin had been planted by Morris's daughter, who knew the farm's routine and had easy access to the employee's house while he was being interrogated at the police station. The corrupt policeman took charge of finding the evidence at the right moment and conducting the investigation in such a way as to prevent other possibilities from being explored. "It was a diabolical plan," said Sheriff Carson, now ashamed for having been manipulated. "They used our rush to solve the case, our need to find a culprit quickly, and transformed that into the perfect weapon against an innocent man." Mike was released immediately, but the months in prison had left deep marks on his soul. He had lost a lot of weight, his hair had turned white, and his eyes carried a sadness that seemed impossible to heal. The simple and cheerful man who worked in the fields of Clearwater Farm had symbolically died in that cell, and what remained was a more fragile, more distrustful, more hurt by life version. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Helen sought him out on the first day after his release, crying with regret and asking for forgiveness for having doubted his innocence. Mike received them with his usual education, but there was a new distance in his eyes, an invisible barrier that injustice had built around his heart. "I don't hold a grudge against you," he said with a calm voice. "I know that you were also victims. You lost your daughter and believed in what appeared to be the evidence. Any parent would do the same thing." "Come back to the farm, Mike," Mr. Arthur pleaded. "Your house is still there. Your job is waiting. Isabella asks about you every day. She wants to see you, wants to thank you for finding a way to save her." But Mike shook his head negatively. "I can't go back there, not after everything that happened. Those fields, that house, everything reminds me of the worst period of my life. I need to start over somewhere else." The compensation he received from the state for the months of unjust imprisonment gave him the financial conditions to restart his life elsewhere. He chose a small town in rural Virginia where nobody knew him, where his story hadn't reached, where he could try to recover the peace he had lost. Thunder, of course, went with him. The dog had become not just his companion, but his hero, directly responsible for having saved his life and Isabella's. During the trip to the new town, Mike looked at the animal with infinite gratitude, knowing that he owed his freedom to the unwavering loyalty of that four-legged heart. "You saved me, old friend," he would say, stroking the golden head he knew so well. "When everyone gave up, when I myself had lost hope, you kept looking. You never doubted, never gave up." In the new town, Mike bought a small property in the mountains, away from movement, surrounded by the nature that had always been his refuge. But this time, it wouldn't be just him and Thunder. He had decided to dedicate his new life to caring for abandoned dogs, for animals that, like him, had been rejected by society and needed a second chance. One by one, he began to rescue dogs from the streets, to care for the injured, to give shelter to those who had nowhere to stay. Thunder became the natural leader of the pack, teaching newcomers the rules of the house and offering the affection that everyone needed to heal from the wounds of abandonment. Isabella, already physically recovered but still in the process of emotional recovery, visited Mike once a month, always accompanied by her parents. The visits were moments of pure joy, where the girl ran through the fields of the property playing with the dogs, laughing as she hadn't done for a long time. "Mr. Mike," she said during one of these visits, "I always knew you hadn't done anything bad to me. Even when I was in that dark place, I thought about you and Thunder, and I knew you would find me." "How did you know that, little one?" "Because you taught me that plants always grow toward the light, and I knew that you were my light, that you would find me even in the dark." The girl's words touched Mike in a way he didn't expect. He realized that despite all the pain, despite all the injustice, there was still goodness in the world. There were still people capable of believing, of forgiving, of loving unconditionally. Mike and Thunder's story gained national repercussion. Newspapers and magazines told the saga of the innocent man who was almost executed and the dog that never gave up, looking for the truth. Thunder became a symbol of animal loyalty, winning awards and honors throughout the country. But for Mike, the true reward wasn't in the fame or public recognition. It was in the quiet afternoons on the porch of the property, surrounded by the dogs he had saved, watching the sun set behind the mountains while Thunder slept by his side. It was in the certainty that he had found his true vocation, caring for those who needed care, loving those who needed love, giving hope to those who had lost faith in humanity. Sebastian Morris and his accomplices were sentenced to long prison terms. The corrupt policeman lost his job and was banned from the force. Morris's daughter, confronted with the consequences of her actions, fell into deep depression and needed psychological treatment to deal with the guilt. But Mike felt no pleasure in the punishment of the guilty. He had learned that revenge didn't heal wounds, that hatred only perpetuated cycles of suffering. He preferred to focus his energy on creating something positive, on transforming his pain into compassion for those who suffered. Years later, when journalists came to visit him to find out how his life was, Mike always gave the same answer. "I learned that human justice can fail, but the justice of the heart never fails. Thunder taught me that. He knew the truth when no one else knew. He followed his heart when all minds were confused." Mike's property became a reference in the region as a sanctuary for abandoned animals. Children from nearby schools came to visit him to meet Thunder and hear the story of his extraordinary loyalty. Mike liked these visits, as he saw in them an opportunity to teach important values: the importance of not judging by appearances, the value of patience and perseverance, and most importantly, the transformative power of unconditional love. Isabella grew up and became a strong young woman, dedicating her life to working with children who were victims of trauma. She knew that her terrible experience could become strength to help others who were going through similar situations. Whenever she talked about her recovery, she mentioned Mike and Thunder as examples that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. And so on a golden Sunday afternoon, while watching his dogs playing in the pasture and feeling the gentle breeze from the mountains touch his face, Mike smiled for the first time in many years. Not a smile of full joy, but a smile of peace, of acceptance, of gratitude for having survived the worst and having found the best in himself. Thunder, now older but still full of energy, ran to him and put his head on his lap, as he always did when he perceived that his owner was thoughtful. Mike stroked the golden fur, now sprinkled with white strands, and murmured, "Thank you, my old friend. Thank you for never giving up on me, for believing when not even I believed. You taught me that true love never gives up, never stops looking, never loses hope." The sun was setting slowly behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. It was a new day coming to an end, but it was also the symbol of a new life that had begun, a life built on the foundations of truth, justice, and love that overcomes all adversities. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mike, Isabella, and Thunder has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative shows us how true loyalty can move mountains and how justice, even if late, always finds its way. If this story moved you as much as it moved us in telling it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the purest bonds of the human soul. Leave your like as a way to support our work and share in the comments how this story made you feel. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the triumph of good over life's adversities. Don't miss our upcoming content, as each story is a journey of discovery and hope. We'll find you here again soon, ready for another emotional adventure that will remain engraved in your hearts forever.